Well, why don't we go ahead and get rolling? We're at about 2 minutes after. First off, if you have some questions, feel free to just drop them into either chat or Q&A. However, we're going to be monitoring all channels. Q&A might be the easiest. If it looks like it is relevant to what we're talking about, then I might interrupt whoever's speaking to address it. If not, I'll try and keep track of what's being asked. And if the same question 2 or 3 times, I'll combine it into one comment or question. We'll try to do everything we can to make sure if you have some specific issues, related to something going on at work that you could use some help with. We are here to help you. That's why we've assembled this group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mention the 3 experts that we have here. I'm going to ask them to take a minute to just introduce themselves. And then we will get into our topic. So first off, I want to introduce Brad Ree from ioXt. Brad, why don't you say hello and just a couple words about what you're working on, and then we'll move on to the others.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ed. So I'm Brad Ree. I'm the CTO for the ioXt Alliance. We're an organization of a little over 500 companies really working on driving security standards, adoption, and then taking an industry-led approach to public policy as it comes down to IoT security, which is an interesting thing. Why is IoT and mobile apps talking today? And from where ioXt looks, there's a lot of different things. A light bulb connecting to the cloud to us is the same as a mobile app running on a cell phone sitting in your pocket. So we really look at how do all things connect, how should they be secured, and driving security standards around that.
Brad, is this like a recruiting video where if you work for IoT, you get to be in San Diego with palm trees behind you? Is that the idea?
I know life is really rough and everything, but yes, we it is bad with everyone working remote, but at least it's nice. It's 75. It's getting a little warm. I heard it might cross 80 out here today, so I'll try to suffer through.
Well, through the hour, what we're going to be doing is as we come up with issues, I want you to chime in with a standards and alliance related perspective. When we first found out about what you were doing, I looked at it. I think you have a fine organization, and we're glad you're here because I think you'll have a good, very unbiased perspective on technology and where things are going. So thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being part of our discussion. So second, I'm going to go to a long-term colleague, Jen Marowitz, who she and I worked together for many years in telecom, and we asked her to come on because she knows an awful lot about wireless and cybersecurity and a million other things. But Jen, why don't you say a couple words about yourself, and looking forward to hear.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jennifer Moravitz, and I work with at&T in the Chief Security Organization, and have responsibility, have a team of just excellent security engineers who do work in areas of IoT security and securing IoT applications and platforms from end to end, as well as we do security integration for our next gen products and services, and some vulnerability management kind of thrown in there as well. So, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with this great group of folks today.
And from the picture behind, there's some St. Louis pride there, right?
You have to get my PR in.
Oh, that's good. It's a great city, one of the best baseball cities in America. So, well, welcome, and thanks for joining us, Jen. Looking forward.
No, thanks for having me.
Particularly when we talk about 5G, it's going to be fun to hear what you think is coming, because 5G seems like it's almost too good to be true. So we're going to get the lowdown from Jennifer on that one. So. And then last but not least, someone I've been working with for a couple of years, and we're all sad that he doesn't have his Christmas tree behind him, because that's his, at some point we'll see it back decorated with Easter eggs or something. But Brian Reed, who I think a lot of you know from NowSecure, very active in our community, good guy. Brian, why don't you say a couple words about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, and for all of you for joining us. I'm a journeyman mobile app development and security guy going back to BlackBerry days. Remember when the original world was dominated by the BlackBerry phone that secured everything on the planet, right? And over time, Apple and Android got started and been on that journey. And by the way, I am famous for working at home. The tree behind me was not a pine tree. The Christmas tree behind me is always fun. But today I'm in the NASA Space Center, otherwise known as my office, that is full of NASA space art surrounding me, along with some funny looking robots if I point in the right place. But anyway, so NowSecure actually, our founder invented modern mobile forensics when the iPhone and the Android device came out. And over the years, we've been building, helping create industry standards around mobile application security and tools and technologies to enable people to pen test their applications and commercially analyze them in high volume. We monitor all the apps in the App Store for security and privacy issues. And we're doing some really cool stuff with AT&T and some really cool stuff with ioXt as well. So I'm excited to be here to share some of the stories and experiences and best practices we can share with the audience today.
So Brian, let's stay with you. So when we think about big changes in the last 10 years, mobility is number one. There's no question about it, where everybody's walking around glued to a phone. And probably has a deeper relationship with their mobile apps than they do with their family anymore. So tell me a little bit about where, I know you and I've spent some time on this, but share with the others where we think on the cybersecurity side, maybe we've got some gaps there. I think there's some things we've forgotten to do or just chosen not to do it. What's your perspective there? There's a lot of legacy security in mobile apps. So share your thoughts here.
Sure. I mean, we can start with some basic numbers, right? So ComScore measures internet traffic. ComScore will show, their latest data shows that 70% of all internet traffic and roughly 70% of all digital time is actually spent in mobile apps, not desktops, right? And so from that perspective, that really brings a reality to the fact that there are 6 million apps in iTunes and Google Play. And I heard from App Annie, there were 200 billion mobile app downloads onto some billion number of mobile devices in 2020 alone, right? So there's no doubt that, you know, the world is pretty much dominated by mobile experiences. For those of us who are locked up with COVID, I mean, the mobile app was the gateway to the enterprise. The mobile app was the gateway to Grubhub delivering food, or, you know, pick your favorite Amazon or other provider, you know, delivering groceries and everything else. The taxi business went like this, and the Uber and Lyft business went like this, right? And we can go on and on and on about how mobile dominates their life. Along the way, on the way to the gravy train of mobile, security and cyber kind of took a back seat. And like many innovation areas, right, there's a racing towards all these great experiences, you know, VR and augmented reality and all the just amazing contextual data where phones can sync with each other and find my friend in a crowd and all that. But we kind of left some holes. And what's actually happened is in our benchmarking of the millions of apps in the public app stores, we find about 85% of them have one or more cybersecurity vulnerabilities that you probably wouldn't want if you're putting personal information in. Some 70% of them actually would violate GDPR or CCPA privacy requirements. And so while the good news is we're using mobile a lot more, the kind of sad news is that most people aren't aware of the risks that lurk under the surface in and around those mobile applications. So I spend a lot of my time writing reports, benchmarking, speaking at events or whatever, just sharing the general knowledge of love mobile, couldn't live without it. My entire life and my family life operates around it. My workday operates around it, except when I need a keyboard. But the reality is it's not the safest thing on the planet. We can solve that. And we're going to share today, I think, some best practices to help people better understand and figure out how to address it.
That makes sense. Now, Brad, you guys, from an alliance perspective, have a kind of broad coverage of these topics. Tell us a little bit about the alliance and how maybe it addresses some of the things we just started to touch on with respect to mobile apps and mobility in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as Brian really talked about, there is a lurking problem of what security is built into these devices, into these apps and everything. So a core two premises that ioXt is really focused on is, on one side, what is considered secure, right? What are the minimums? What are the baselines that we need to do? And then we also try to provide a roadmap to actually go above and beyond. But the other equally important part that we're really focused on is, how do you make security transparent to the consumer so that when people are buying or downloading products and services, they know what they are getting? And by bringing that up front, now great companies who are doing great things can get credit for that, and you create a free market competition. Without these kind of transparent kind of roles, what you're really left with is consumers are pretty much being told you should buy products from brands that you know and trust. Well, that does two different things. That is not necessarily the right choice. And beyond that, it also cuts out great innovation that may be coming up from great startups that are doing the right stuff. So instead of just trying to ride on, the brands that you knew forever probably are protecting you, what we're really saying is, let's measure people to actual standards, provide a way to rank them, and then most important, bring that up front so that consumers can now make choices. And that's really how we see breaking this hurdle, so that we can bring it up front and let competition win.
Brad, is it just consumers, or for B2B, would it be a similar kind of thing?
For B2B, it becomes even more important, right? If you're going to be buying and deploying phones or services across your entire enterprise, you absolutely want to know what you're getting. As a matter of fact, one of our board companies, Google, what they've done is they've actually brought ioXt certification into the Android Enterprise Recommended program. Because honestly, if an enterprise is looking to buy cell phones for their company, what you want to really know is, how long is that phone going to be supported? So it's not just a binary stamp in that case. It may be, I'm willing to pay a little bit more to get an extra year or two of security updates and services. So yes, enterprise is 100% in the scope of what we're trying to support.
Jennifer, when mobile apps first popped up, they were somewhat limited. Remember that old Edge network that we were struggling with on the iPhone? It never seemed to work right. And now, through multiple iterations, the major carriers, including AT&T, have done such a good job. Now with 5G, what's coming here? Like, are we going to have enough capacity and bandwidth to maybe see even like subsequent innovation, like another wave of innovation for mobile apps that just, do virtual reality or all kinds of expensive computation that might require a lot of network interaction? Is that something that you think we have to look forward to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that 5G's got a lot of different security advancements. One of those is software-defined networking, which allows us to embed security in the RAN itself, at the edge, which the concept of the edge network, is new with 5G. So there's an edge network segment, and then all the way into the core. So, and software-defined networking capabilities allows you to, quickly pivot and pull in security functionality in this case as needed to do different kinds of things, to do monitoring at the edge, detection of botnets and DDoS types of events, block malicious traffic. So it allows the carriers to better respond to kind of malicious activities in a quicker way. And then there's also the capability, which has been talked about in the industry a lot, of network slicing. So it's a concept of isolation of aspects of the network. So conceptually, you could take pieces of the network from the RAN through the edge all the way to the core, and dedicate it to different types of devices. So you could have slices that are dedicated to different mobile endpoints, a category of apps. Perhaps you could take different slices that could be dedicated to things that are need low latency and high bandwidth, things like autonomous vehicles. You could take another slice and put massive IoT, in that slice. So slicing allows you to kind of dedicate resources and capabilities in a way that kind of ensures privacy and security. And then there's other security advantages to 5G as well. There's just stronger encryption as well, over LTE, between the devices themselves and the network, and then all the network flows are authenticated and encrypted. So there's just a lot of capabilities and more inherent security.
I want to bring up hardware versus software and chat with you a minute about this. You and I would both agree that software defined, like for radio access, you can do slicing, like you said. I mean, it's really amazing. And it's also pretty darn cost effective. I guess is that investments into the network are going to live longer because you can modify it. But like a 101 sort of thing that you write in chapter 1 in a security textbook is that software always has bugs in it, and hardware a lot of times is a little harder to attack. Do you, when you're debating or having lunch with your colleagues at AT&T about hardware versus software, what do you say when somebody says, well, bringing all this software and I'm worried that that stuff's going to get hacked? What are the pros and cons there in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid concern, right? And I say that, it kind of emphasizes the importance of integrating security into the product lifecycle, into the software development lifecycle, and which we pay a lot of attention to at AT&T, but is necessary, and that means kind of robust security testing, and kind of fixing the vulnerabilities on a staying on top of it on a frequent basis. I think that, in my opinion, software-defined networking allows, more elasticity and flexibility. And I think that you'll see kind of, the speeds and at which, things can shift back and forth are there as well. So I mean, it's a fair point, right? Just like, if you look at IoT devices themselves, I mean, if you start looking into the firmware of different IoT devices, and look at the different CVEs that pop up, there's a lot of concerns there as well. So I think it's just, yes, there's more software, but there's more flexibility to incorporate security more quickly, more elastically. And I think that outweighs, the, concern that you would have.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Now, Brian, as you guys start to kind of develop your high assurance of the testing and so on for mobile apps, do you expect to see these apps a little bit more tightly bound to some of these software-defined features in 5G? Like, do you think that will affect the test process? Maybe make it broader, and like instead of maybe more isolated? What do you expect to see?
Yeah, I think it's a good, interesting question. So why don't we sort of start with how we got to where we are today, right? So state-of-the-art mobile security testing typically is analyzing a mobile application with about 600 tests. You're testing storage, you're testing network, you're testing the code on the device, you're testing the API services that it talks to on the back end, and so on and so forth. And so you can discover things like man-in-the-middle attack because it's an unverified, unvalidated, unencrypted network. It could be the disaster of sharing unencrypted user ID and password over the air. It could be permissioning so any other app can scrape data out of your app, or your malicious app is scraping the contact database off the device. Right. So I think what will be very interesting will be at what level will the 5G carrier providers be working with the handset manufacturers, otherwise known as Apple, Samsung, Google, and all the rest, to expose those controls or configurable controls to the application developer, who can in turn take advantage of them. Right. And so as we've been talking, I was thinking about a scenario that was in a conversation I was on a few months ago. We have a number of power companies, right, that are our customers. Imagine a world where the power company has their, wireline utility installers, all those kinds of people, maintenance people, and they have special apps that they've built. Those special apps are talking to things like windmills, power substations, telephone poles, and all the rest. And they've collaborated with AT&T to lock down the pipe. Right. And so I do think that for some of these more extreme scenarios, I'm using the words extreme, where it's like, I really want the best security I can get at every possible layer, because I don't want somebody to stop the nuclear reactor, or I don't want them to shut down my windmills, or whatever those things are. And today we do all kinds of things with, like, reverse IP addressing or locking down IMEI and whatever else. But now we can actually make it super flexible, so someone in a control center could turn it on and off and manipulate it, and the developers can take advantage of it. So we do expect that those things will happen. I can't speak for Apple and Google and all the rest, but I've got to believe they're going to want to take advantage of those and expose that to the developers. And the developers are going to bring innovations none of us here have even thought of once they get the ability. I mean, being able to configure your network and being able to configure your IoT device and manipulate your mobile app to behave in a like completely locked down pipe, I think is really promising. And then the other slice I'll drive into this is the density thing, right? 5G brings a level of density. So now maybe I can have an application that's connecting the telephone pole sensors as I drive down the street, right? And you've got this mass data gathering capability because I'm measuring something like trying to find a fault in a power line or something. So I do think there'll be a new wave.
Yeah.
And a lot of these would be based on interesting use cases where security is king and the additional layers of control I can get for the thing in the network beyond what I can do in the app will really matter.
Brad, one of our attendees, Michelle's asking about BYOD, and I wanted to ask you, like from a context of ioXt, are general certifications and things useful when there's such non-homogeneity in the devices that people are using? Does it help bring maybe some commonality, and perhaps any thoughts you might have on BYOD in general?
Yeah, BYOD is super interesting, right? We've talked about this for quite a while, and then we all lived it through 2020 and even into 2021. That it's not just BYOD; it's now bring your computer into your own home, right? So as we're working remote, we've jumped in with both feet into the BYOD culture, and I don't think we're going to be unraveling that anytime soon. What I do see is it is important to really look at the apps, the systems that we're running, and we need to stop assuming that we're on a hardwired corporate computer on a corporate network. Instead, okay, how is this thing then hardened? If it's running on a mobile phone, that phone could have malware, malicious things going on there too. So I think it's even more important as we talk about enterprise class apps and things like this, that we really do assume at the beginning now that this will be on untrusted networks with untrusted equipment. And then how do you measure and make sure that your vendors and suppliers are actually taking that to heart and providing the proper security and services? And then even another interesting thing that I'll throw some credit back over to the NowSecure team. It's even in that continuous integration and development cycle. It's not about being secured at launch. It's about keeping your software secure through the life cycle. So we do need to sort of trust nothing, trust no one, and build systems that are continually being monitored. So I do think, BYOD, it's absolutely here in spades right now, and we just need to build controls around that.
Do you see a high assurance hardware base being part of that? We have a question about trusted execution. I'll ask Brian also to comment, but what's the role of these hardware bases in the hardening that you referenced?
So one thing that we do over at ioXt, because what we focused on was we were looking at products and services, but partially because that's what consumers and buyers see. It's also every time a camera got hacked, senators got letters sent to them about, can I trust these cameras that, are in with the baby, or, things like this. So we have to address that. But we were actually at a really interesting point on we want to drive, and we do have certain levels that you reach where you need to run on trusted hardware. And what is really important in this space, we looked at it, we said, boy, we could go build a whole compliance program around all the hardware. Instead, how do we all work together? So what we ended up doing on our standards is we actually work with protocol groups, so Zigbee, Z-Wave, some of these guys. We work with ARM PSA, who happens to measure the security of the processors and stuff. So I think this is going to be a team effort of alliances and industry to make sure that things stack up. And at the end of the day, though, the consumer does need to know this app is secure. It assumes trusted hardware. I'm running it on secured hardware, and we're good to go. So yeah, we
that's
have to have ways to measure, and the most important thing always transparency to the buyer and consumer, right? That's what really helps drive this. If you can now start seeing it, companies will compete. I'll even share in ways of our certifications. We've certified quite a few different cell phones and everything. We've had a couple brands actually choose not to certify with us.
really.
Yeah, and because what was rather interesting was they said, we really, whenever we go to market, we need to be at the top score of everything. And right now we're a little shy in one area. We're going to hold off because we're going to improve that and we'll come back to you. So it's the exact behavior that you're looking for, right? You're seeing people race to go not at minimums, but achieve top scores.
Yeah, I never wanted to take my SATs until I was ready either. So I think that makes sense. But Brian, you guys are doing trusted execution testing. How do you do that? You try and break it or something? What's the
we have part of our business that is the pen testing business. So we do a lot of mobile app pen testing, including with ioXt and their cast of characters. And when you're testing apps, you wind up testing a lot of hardware and back end and a bunch of other things that kind of go with it. So early on, when TEE came to light, our research team was working on TEE projects with some of the original founders and developments of that. And so we're big believers in the firmware, secure enclave for credentials and other, critical material. The good news is that most devices now have moved to a hardware-based model for that and are exposing those. And Apple devices and most of the Android devices are there or going there. And so I think that's really great for the planet. I think what's interesting that Brad also brought up is this idea of how do I get certified and what does certification mean, right? Because to a large extent, when you look at mobile apps, there is no real certifier that says this app is safe, whether it's running on a TEE chip or not. And over time, we think the world will probably evolve some sort of a more commercially visible, underwriter's laboratory, good housekeeping seal of approval like thing. With ioXt, we got on board with them because they're doing that for devices and they're doing that for mobile apps, right? You can self-certify, get third-party certified, but you come in and you get the badge that says, yeah, you've been tested. Here's a standards bar. You meet this bar, you're in, you're out. Like there's a line in the sand and you either cross it or you don't. And I think that now that this sort of Pandora's box is open or the horses are out of the barn on the mobile stuff, because of the massive dependency on mobile, I do think we're going to see in the next year or two more of a movement towards that. It may or may not be driven in part by an Apple or a Google. It's more likely the consortium behavior that makes it even for everybody, not like picking favorites or what have you. And that's why we love standards like ioXt and OWASP and Cloud Security Alliance and all those different groups, because it really is all the stakeholders at the table. You got the handset manufacturers, you got the app developers, you got the operating system and the development tools people and the network infrastructure people and the carrier, and we're all kind of looking at it from different angles and trying to build the security all the way through.
That's awesome. Now, Jennifer, let's talk about IoT threat here for a minute. Remember when the network was just you connected mobile devices, that was it, and I had trouble doing that. Now it seems like it's hard to find something that's not connected to a mobile network. Talk a little bit about some of the threats that you see emerging on all the different things that are connected, from maybe botnet threats to critical devices to medical. To what are you guys seeing over at at&T?
So we always. From a carrier perspective, I think people often think, okay, it's easy for the carrier, right? But it's as you know, it's not, right? Lots of times devices can be obfuscated behind gateways. If there's encryption in the path, we can't see what's going on. So we rely on volumetric kind of indicators. We have a team of people who are analysts and they're excellent at their jobs, so they kind of monitor the backbone. But and we do what we can in the network to embed security. I think what's interesting about 5G is you're going to have this capability to move the capabilities that were typically in the core to the edge, and that means capabilities so that you don't have to route the traffic all the way up through the core of our network. So you can provide internet access in the case of a business. The 5G capability will be on-prem and just direct from that point, as opposed to routing it up So then that presents concerns, right, of making sure you have the same kinds of capabilities at the edge that you have in the core from a network security perspective. So somewhat of a new attack vector that we have to keep an eye on. You know, we also like to look at and work with the OEMs as well, especially where we have, you know, kind of closer relationships. And you know, we could do these things to secure the network. We could add the encryption, and we could, you know, we could authenticate the devices, and, you know, you could do the network slicing, and you could do a lot of other things. But if the end device isn't secure, it poses a problem for the carriers. And so, you know, we work with a lot of foundations like, you know, CTA, CTIA, you know, NIST and other entities to provide our recommendations on how to secure endpoints, so that, you know, we're not just solely dependent on the network to provide these capabilities. So, but yeah, I mean, we do keep an eye on these types of attacks, and we mitigate them when we need to. And they can be problematic for us. I mean, especially when you have these larger botnet types of attacks that come in, because it jeopardizes the, you know, availability in terms of network, you know, capabilities. And so we have to get on that relatively quickly, so we, you know, other customers aren't impacted.
Are you guys still seeing like botnets made up of really unusual things like you know, cameras and all kinds of weird?
You know,
I remember seeing some of that, thinking, "Whoa, this is crazy."
This year seems to be the year of the ransomware, right?
Maybe like botnets. I'll take botnets.
Just like knock on wood somewhere, but yeah, but we still do see some, you know, botnet activity across the board. So
yeah, I would imagine, you know, how everything sways from one thing to the next. I would imagine that you know, once you do the math on what's connected to a 5G network, you don't need much outbound bandwidth or capacity to create a lot of havoc if you've got enough devices that are connected up. Like
right.
every X-ray machine on the planet or every wind turbine was doing a little bit of something towards some target. It's pretty scary when you do the math on that. It's so easy to get a very large volume. So.
Oh yeah, well, and it'll continue to grow as 5G becomes ubiquitous everywhere, right? I mean, everything's just going to onboard, and that's why, you know, I do feel like the capability of even using slicing for quarantining. You know, we talked about
right.
With 5G, there's this concept of, well, can you deauthorize a device that's not playing well? And I haven't seen that so much emerge, but I do feel like, you know, if you see groups of devices that aren't playing well on the network, you can quarantine them to a slice.
That is cool. That's like mobile incident response. That's a very cool concept. I hope you guys do that.
And I do feel like that's realistic. But then you can also protect different kinds of categories of devices, things that are, you know, you always used to say this and it sticks in my head, you know, what scares me is having a 10-ton vehicle coming down the highway, right? And somebody manages to figure out a way to hack it while it's moving. And so, you know, you could put a whole slice together for vehicles, right? And, you know, connect the vehicles and put different kinds of security controls around that, monitoring and mitigation capability. So I do feel like the slicing, I know it's been receiving a lot of PR, but it does have the ability to differentiate.
It's awesome stuff.
Yeah. So
now, Brian, let's talk a little bit about threat models for mobile testing. I know early sort of acceptance, security, or even pen testing around devices, probably pretty simple, but now I'm guessing it's gotten pretty complex. Like I look at the MITRE ATT&CK model, and you look at some of the other things, these frameworks that lay out what needs to be validated. Tell us a little bit about how you guys do that when you're going about pen testing or doing any type of testing on a mobile app. What do you do? Like, what's the methodology?
It's a good question. Yeah. So, you know, for people who are looking for resources, there's a variety of them. ioXt has great resources, including a set of standards for testing criteria and development criteria for mobile apps and the things they talk to, VPNs, IoT things, and what have you, right? OWASP with MASVS, which is the mobile project at OWASP, not the web one, the mobile, has a great checklist of how to securely develop something and then how to test it. And MASVS has, you know, some 70 or 80 tests, categories of protections. When you look at ioXt, we collectively pick the 50 or so ones that are really IoT and mobile app centric from the ioXt perspective. But my product has 600 tests in it. Why? In part because it's the union of everything you could conceivably think of. But the reality is that if you go back to that application architecture, my app talks to cloud services that talks to my data center. Okay, now multiply that by about 30 to 50 things, because the app is talking to other services on the device. It's talking to all different kinds of cloud stuff, whether they're even like metrics and analytics services or advertising or what have you. And then it's talking to some backend stuff. And so when we test something, we start with a threat model, which is what's the IP that needs to be protected? What's the data that needs to be protected? Now, IP is not PII, right? IP is how do you calculate a banking function? Or how do you do cryptocurrency? Like that's intellectual property that you need to protect from a hacker. And then you have PII, everything from credentials to my social security number or my bank account number, what have you, right? So from that threat model that we do, either in our software as a person interacting with the software or talking to one of our humans if they're going to do a pen test, they build the model. And then our attacker engine is really interesting. So I've been with security companies before, and because we did 5 or 6 years of pen testing before we built tools, we built an attacker model for testing the app. So every time there's a new exploit, we build a new test, right? This library here, this function call there. Hey, BLE just came out. What's happening with BLE and how's that going to evolve? And, things of that nature. And so we really do kind of attack and tear apart the app, whether it's our software or our humans doing that, looking for the weakest links. And there's lots of patterns. Like 50% of the apps in the App Store leak data over the network. 49% of apps in the App Store leak data on the device that another app or a backup could collect unencrypted data, right? Those are two giant swaths of, well, if I just used a secure way to store my data and I made sure my SSL connections were encrypted and authenticated, wow, that's a big step up, right?
That's interesting.
To protect myself.
When we first started doing web penetration testing, remember it was like everybody got this mistaken impression that there were only two attacks: cross-site scripting and buffer overflow. It was like, yeah, there's two kinds we got both kinds of music, country and Western, right? It was like, that's it.
Exactly.
Like, and I would always laugh and think, there's a lot more, just that's so prevalent.
Oh, there is like,
But in mobility, are there one or two that dominate, or is it all across the board?
Well, the data leakage over the network is the biggest, highest frequency thing that occurs, right? And whether that's PII or IP or something else, right, that's leaking over the network. Now, it could be exploitable for a man-in-the-middle attack, or it could be data harvesting, meaning I can just see people communicating to the back end and I'm scooping up credentials, right, or what have you. You probably heard there were all kinds of interesting hacks in the last year, right? Like Walgreens was breached with prescription data last year. Facebook Messenger, and multiple Facebook products had multiple breaches and data leakage events last year. I'm not even going to get into TikTok, so we'll just skip that category. But there's a myriad of different things that can happen, and even big sophisticated companies like Microsoft and Oracle and IBM and what have you, they sometimes have weaknesses that can happen either because of third-party code they have, or their testing was incomplete, or what have you. It is very complicated to write a highly secure application these days. And because there's so many awesome services you can take advantage of, sometimes it's the services you're taking advantage of that is the weakness. There was a graphics library that came out of a Chinese developer that was harvesting data. Now that graphics library for years was great. And then suddenly there was an update, and welcome to the supply chain disaster. And that update started not only harvesting data, it was actually hijacking traffic and ad traffic, right? And that's where you get into supply chain stuff and all of that, right? That feeds mobile just like it feeds everything else. So threat model it, know how to protect it. There's like 3 or 4 things that if you focus on them, you're going to cover 80 to 90% of what mostly happens that's bad. And then there's the extreme case, like we talked about earlier, where you got to lock it down. But that's for maybe 5 or 10% of the apps in the world need the hardcore 5G layered security on top of IoT layered security on top of app security for something like energy. So.
Brian, we got some people actually creating PowerPoints in real time here for their presentations. They want those stats. So what you used a couple.
I'm a stat machine. So I'm gonna
let's throw some good numbers out here so people get something for their money here.
Exactly. 85% of the 6 million apps in Apple App Store and Google Play Store, 85% of them have one or more security vulnerability. 70% of them leak private data that would violate CCPA or GDPR. Now, depending on what the app is, like if it's a game, you may not care. Now, that being said, of the vulnerabilities we find, half the vulnerabilities are related to unencrypted network data. 49%, so we call it half, the vulnerabilities we find as well, almost all of the other half, we find are related to unencrypted data storage on the device or permissions that allow another app or service to scrape data out of the app. Those are your two big ones. If I properly store and encrypt the data and protect the permissions, and if I properly encrypt the data over the network, I get almost everything, right? And so that's kind of the areas where you really want to focus. And for the people who are asking about that, by the way, there's an infographic on our website that are the top 5 most frequently found vulnerabilities, and it's got all the stats and the citation if you're looking for it.
Well, you had me at stats, but you just lost me at infographic, I'm afraid.
Pretty pictures with the stats. We also, by the way, have a mobile risk tracker. I'm just going to finish off. I'm sorry, I meant to. Mobile risk tracker. .nowsecure.com is launching in 2 weeks. It is a benchmarking tool for App Store risk. Everyone who's attending today will get a link to that. It is free and open to use, and you can look up vulnerability patterns in many different categories of applications as a learning vehicle.
So now, that's a lot of really good information. We appreciate that. Now, we're at about 15 minutes left, and I wrote down on my paper here, don't forget to ask Brad to talk about ioXt membership. Now, Brad, I know you're not here to plug or anything. I'm doing it for you. Why don't you share? There's probably some people working for companies that ought to be part of the alliance here. Why don't you take a couple minutes and just go ahead and tell them about the group and how they might join. And if people complain about the marketing here, they can blame me because you didn't ask me to do that.
No problem at all. I will actually hop on one interesting thing as Brian was talking about some of the top vulnerabilities and everything. And the one plug that I'll put in is, once again, our original heritage was really around devices. So we had a lot of device manufacturers that then when we launched our mobile app profile for certification, we basically did a trial of the profile, make sure everything works, work with all the labs. And what was really interesting is we had quite a few apps come through that to help prove out the system. And, one of the most common questions was, okay, well, out of all the testing that you did, what surprised you the most? And the part that surprised me the most was how many of the companies were actually surprised at the results. So it was, we had a lot of great companies come through and they were very confident up front. This thing's great. I got the best development team. And then we start doing the scans and we go, hey, did you realize that some of your developers are logging this? And back to the stuff that Brian was talking about of, did you know that there is this one, you made a connection out here and it wasn't authenticated? And so, the thing is that a lot of these, you're integrating multiple libraries, you've got diverse teams that are putting things together, or especially what we see as device companies that are great manufacturers, they know how to produce things in large scale, and they may have leaned on some outsourced teams to get them to market faster. And lo and behold, hey, they were a little bit surprised. So I really want to, the part that my big takeaway out of that whole trial was what surprised me the most was that the developers were surprised, right? So with that being said, I'll move on to the second piece, why you should get engaged in the ioXt Alliance. So one of the important things that we do at the ioXt Alliance is whenever we develop our security standards, what we're focused on is smart home, smart building, cellular, and mobile apps. Now, inside of each of those markets, though, we have a baseline security requirement that we developed, and it's our security pledge. From there, though, we build out application-specific security standards. So, clearly mobile apps have a lot of things that are very unique compared to light bulbs. So instead of trying to make the light bulb standard fit for everything, what we really do is we say, well, let's get all the stakeholders who are in that market to come in and help define what good looks like, what great looks like, what are the controls, and then most important, take that and drive that into the market. So we've got several different working groups that go on in ways of developing the standards. We've got one working right now around developing privacy requirements, but not privacy like another GDPR, but what does privacy look like for connected glasses like these Alexa glasses or watches or things like that. We've got a cloud group that is working on how do you secure communications between device and cloud, mobile and cloud, but also cloud to cloud. And then a very important thing that we've got going on is we have a public policy work group where we bring in regulators to talk about the stuff that they're doing. We also kick the regulators out to talk about the stuff the regulators are doing and how we can help steer and guide everyone. Because if you're not watching on the IoT front, about every single country is looking at how do you do labeling, what are the minimums, what are the penalties if things go wrong. And the most important thing on all of this is you need to be in the discussion, you need to be in the center of this pack. You don't want to be the straggler behind that says, oh, I was doing my own thing and I think I'm good enough, and then something bad happens. So without a doubt, join the alliance, get into the discussion, join some of the work groups. It is a truly fascinating thing when you hear about the attacks that a Facebook or a Google see on their cloud infrastructure and how they mitigate this. If you're creating a connected irrigation system or you're doing an attendance time tracker app, knowing what some of these guys in large volume are dealing with, you can pick that up without having to suffer through the pains. So there you go. That's my plug.
Why don't you, while we're talking, why don't you into chat just drop a link so that people know where to visit the Alliance. Now, Jennifer, on this topic of certification, I know that a lot of people don't realize that the carrier does a bunch of this too. Like it's not, all these levels of work. Curious, tell us from an industry perspective, are there some trends here? Do you see things coming in that are better certified? Does the software look better? Do the devices look better? Or is it just the opposite where there's a bunch of junk being thrown to connect? What do you think?
I think certain OEMs are really, really diligent about security, right? And even those, as Brad pointed out, are surprised sometimes when you do, because we do security testing internal as well. Of course, not for everything, but for kind of relationships where AT&T's in a kind of more integrated with the OEM for an end-to-end service or something that's white labeled. And in those circumstances, I mean, the OEM works and is very diligent. I think when you're dealing more like probably the business side of things, probably the issues aren't as great. I think the consumer devices are probably pose a little bit more of a problem. But in general, we're seeing, I guess, an upward trend. And people looking and taking security of their endpoints seriously, which is a good thing for us. And I would also say, like, this concept of labeling, I was gonna ask both Brian and Brad, their thoughts, because I think that this is something we have been discussing in AT&T for many years. This concept of would a label help, and to raise how to raise awareness, I guess, really more from the consumer perspective, because I think from a consumer perspective it's a little confusing, right? I think maybe from a business perspective is different, but when you're a consumer, I think people just assume, oh, this stuff's been tested, they can't sell these things without, what I'm saying? And so I don't think that they put a lot of thought into it. I think there's a lot of assumptions that go on, and I was curious, what you both thought about, labeling, the concept of labeling. Do you feel like it would be a good differentiator in the consumer space specifically?
Great question. Brian, why don't we start with you then, Brad? Maybe what you're
super interested in how Brad's going to answer that, because I know he's thought even more about it. I think for me, my personal sometimes will step in, right? So for me, I do believe, both as a business person and a consumer, that I'd be willing to pay more for something that's clearly labeled that I know is certified secure. right? So I think there's a direct financial and competitive revenue generating advantage to a business to get somehow certified and use it in their labeling, right? So I do believe in that. I think that I'm going to throw a dart at it. 30% of consumers will understand that. So, maybe that's a good thing because some of this is about raising the bar. Maybe it's an interesting thing where we've got to figure out how to get the other 70%. I'm going to detour for a real quick second. How many people have antivirus on their laptop? How many years have we been talking about don't click on strange links and put antivirus on your laptop? How many laptops still don't have antivirus? How many people still click on strange links? Right? So even something very well socialized, I would say, like that, still I hear has a relatively low adoption rate in the consumer world, whereas the business world is all over it. And so some of this people are just going to do what they're going to do. And we hope that rising tides rise all boats.
I'm going to offer a bridge comment before we go over to Brad for his thought, because he'll have the most interesting point here. But when I was a little kid, I remember seeing the UL sticker on a lamp and asking my mother what that was. It was my first concept of quality assurance. At age like 5, I'm going, "What's this, Mom?" And she said, "That's Eddie. That's so when you plug the lamp into the wall, it doesn't blow up." And I remember thinking, wow, I'd like to see one that does blow up. That sounds like more fun, but nevertheless, Brad, what do you think? What's your thought on the idea of labeling?
So first and foremost, ioXt 100% promotes labeling. We've got labeling. We've got a binary stamp with a QR code so you can see more. You can see the latest information about it. You can see if there's been any issues, the product's been disabled or no longer supported. However, with all of that being said, right, we do want to drive competition and everything. When we look at a lot of the national labeling initiatives, I think that it's in the right direction, but we need to make sure and we got to be careful that it actually creates the right behavior. First and foremost, I would rather see that we actually set minimums because consumers really expect that products are secure. And trying to get into this discussion of how secure is it, how important, what level, that's hard and expensive. It'd be much easier to just say, no, if it's going to be sold like in the UK, they've got a couple of security requirements that they're looking at for any consumer product. Doesn't matter how it's sold inside the country, it has to have vulnerability disclosure program, no fixed passwords, and have a stated security expiration period, right? Those are the kind of things that consumers expect. Now, the other thing I want to caution on the label, because we've looked, of course, at this a lot, is it a binary label? Is it levels? It was actually in one of our very first meetings. I had a section, we were going to do 3 levels, right? Bronze, silver, gold, something like that. I scheduled 15 minutes for that discussion. An hour and a half in, we had to table it because we had this 3-dimensional graph. And it's like, oh my God, this is never going to work. The challenge is, and where we settled with these profiles is you certify the device for what it is. A light bulb is inherently different than a camera. If you say a light bulb is bronze and a camera is gold, when a consumer sees those sitting next to each other, I guarantee you that they're going to think bronze or 1 star must mean bad, gold or 3-star must mean good. And that actually drives the wrong behavior because it's going to make the light bulb guys who can't afford to build, gold standards, they're going to not participate. So labeling on its surface sounds great, but then we have to make sure that the market incentives work if we're going to roll them out nationwide.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Well, listen, we have reached the last few minutes here. What I'm going to do is ask each of you to just leave one parting thought, suggestion, recommendation, kind of briefly. I'll just, Brian, we'll start with you and then we'll go over to Jen and then we'll close with Brad. But Brian, any recommendations for people beyond, of course, I hope they do get in touch with you at NowSecure. You guys do a nice job over there.
Yes, I think, the parting thought is I love mobile. I'm wearing devices all over me. I've got a Aura Health Ring and an Apple Watch and an Android watch, and I have more devices than anybody in the world.
You do have
Love
a
it.
glow to you somehow.
Exactly. Like, love it, engage with it, live it. It's, I mean, mobile is here to stay. IoT is just amazing with where we're going. I have a Tesla and all kinds of home automation and all that other stuff. I'm a security nut and I have lots of it. Right. So from that perspective, and just get smart. Whether you're a consumer, whether you're a business user, whether you're in the IT or security department, get smart about it and make sure that you're doing the reasonable things that make sense to take care of you, your family, your loved ones, and whatever else. If you're on the business side, ask your IT people what they're doing. Ask your security people. If you're an application developer, say, hey, what do I need to know to make sure that this really cool app that I'm building? And we had some people ask about joining ioXt. That's a big thing. If you have some skills and some time, get involved with the standards bodies, right? A lot of us are in there. There are a lot of people who are come from the non-vendor world, meaning they're not making stuff, but they're a stakeholder. They work for a credit card company. They work for a carrier. They work for one of the other, types of organizations. So participate and get smart.
That's great. Thank you so much. Jen, any closing thoughts or suggestions for folks?
Yeah, I would just say if you're a consumer, definitely just educate yourself just on the basics, because I mean, you see phishing scams and all kinds of mobile app scams, and it's just easy, even though not to click, it's just easy sometimes if it looks like something, you're getting a parcel, click, so just, I think education's key. And if you're on the business side, education is also important, but I would say that end-to-end security view and making sure, as you pointed out, Ed, we're moving more predominantly into a software-based world, and you have to look at it, a repeatable process to kind of ensure that you're integrating security at all stages of a development lifecycle, and continue to monitor that, because that's really kind of what's leading to all these issues that we have. So
that's great advice. Keep up the good work back at the old shop. I'm very proud of everything you guys are doing over there. And Brad, what we'll do is we'll give you the last thought here. What suggestions do you have for folks?
Well, what I can absolutely say is, if you're a developer, if you're a manufacturer, be it ioXt or another org, if you're not tracking some form of security standard, driving this through your development channel, you are really putting your organization at risk. Even I saw SolarWinds just recently, the shareholders filed suit against the I think it was the CISO, the VP of engineering, and several others for not taking this stuff serious. And so, be it an ioXt horse or another horse, jump on one of the security horses, ride that, be involved, don't get left behind, because when bad things happen, they're much worse when you're doing it yourself.
That's wonderful. So listen, first of all, I want to thank the three wonderful panelists. Brian in particular. Brian, you and I dreamed this up a month or two ago. And
we did.
Such a great
And here we are. This was awesome.
And always fun working with you, Jen and Brad. Thanks for joining. On behalf of my team, the analysts team at TAGCyber, and certainly NowSecure, and Earl, I know he's quiet in the background helping make sure our tech works here. Thanks, Earl, for keeping things nice and smooth. If anybody has any questions in chat, we left some emails there. Jen and I are both very easy to find on the internet as well. So thank you all, and we appreciate you spending time. Everyone stay safe and healthy. We'll see you all later.
Cheers.
Thank you.